I want to talk on is because you've had this evolution, obviously, in your career and where you are today. I want to kind of talk about how you started in biomedical engineering and medical devices, right? Then you moved into marketing and you didn't just join it, right? You didn't just join as someone that showed up. You ran a small agency, you kind of sat in the back, just try to collect a check, but you tried to blow up how it was done. What I want to know is where did that conviction come from? Even as someone who didn't study marketing back in college and have a ton of marketing experience per se, how did you become so convicted and what made you so sure that a lot of people were doing it wrong and you were onto something right?
A lot of people don't know this, but I worked in B2B marketing, product management, pricing, uh, downstream like comms and demand gen for 5 or 7 years before I started Refine Labs. It just wasn't in VC-backed tech companies. It was in VC-backed medical device companies and publicly traded holdings companies and things like that. When I had the big insight was that the company that I worked for at the time spent $37 million a year on sales and $2.5 million a year on marketing. And most of the marketing expenses were spent on headcount and events. And I introduced a what I would consider, and this is 2015, a progressive like demand generation approach into this company. And they gave me a $5,000 budget to test,
Mm.
right? And our current customer acquisition cost is like 100 grand, right? So at 5K, you can't even really figure anything out because you'd need to spend 20 times that in order to meet the CAC of one customer, right? And with a 5K experiment, we landed 3 customers. So now you're taking it from $100,000 to get a customer to $1,500. Um, and so that was profound. Back in the day, like before 2018 Cambridge Analytica, you could literally go into Facebook ads and type, I want to target the respiratory director at this hospital. It was perfect B2B targeting. All the ER physicians, I uploaded a list of 500 hospitals. You targeted every one and every single one of our accounts. I was running a ABM strategy with no tech, getting clicks for less than 2 cents. It was absolutely insane. And then I presented the data to the CEO and the leaders of the company, and and it was like, okay, our pipeline velocity, our customer acquisition costs, our growth rate, like, is a really good idea. And they shut the program down. So they shut the program down. And they decided to double their sales headcount next year. And so that was the moment that I realized, oh, like people just don't look at this the way that there was a 50 million dollar company at that point that had raised $300 million. It's like people just don't look at it the same way that I do.
Yeah.
So I knew how much it worked, and I realized how much people were missing the point. That was where the conviction really developed. And then I left that company. I brought the strategy to a new company, and the same thing happened 9 months later. And so once I saw it twice, then I was like, I can see the pattern here that everyone's following a certain playbook. I've tried all the things in that playbook. I realized that mine works 100 times better, what I've developed. And then so that was the conviction it was not just some random idea of like, oh, I think I'm cool. It was like, oh, I can see this in real life about how people just aren't understanding this the right way. And that how much things have changed from like building a tech company in 2005 to building a tech company in 2019. And then COVID happened, right? And when COVID happened, that was really like my message was being received pretty well up until that point. But when COVID happened, that's when everything, like, it became really obvious because companies couldn't spend 50% of their variable marketing budget on events anymore. So they had to put it somewhere. And basically everyone had underestimated digital up until that point. And so at that point, it's like a change happened that was outside, and I was just sitting there waiting with like the right strategy that I developed to catch that wave.
I feel like this is therapy for both me and a lot of the marketers, a lot of CMOs that will tune in and I talk to because it still exists today, right? And maybe your exit out of Refine at that point is like at it wasn't that long ago, but not a whole lot has also changed. And we see that a lot, right? We're seeing, the sales driven CEO kind of has a blind eye to the marketing, wants to double revenue, so he'll double sales count. It doesn't work. Then they bring in a firm to help with marketing. Marketing outperforms, and he goes, "That works really well. I'm going to go hire twice as many salespeople again." It's almost like they're not hearing the own empirical data, right? And since you had two kind of at bats to do that and see it work, I can see where that kind of experience lends itself to then trust, self trust, and then conviction, right? And then you built a major platform on that. So hopefully I'm capturing that right. But it sounds like you put yourself out there, took a very calculated, a bet or made a very calculated bet. It worked on two accounts. And then that kind of built some of that self trust for you as a launch to this.
Just because of my level of conviction didn't me and just like how to me how obvious it was and how many people were agreeing with me and things like that still, I don't know what the exact figure is, but there were quite a few companies that failed in our system at Refine Labs, right? And companies that were from a metric standpoint succeeding, doing way better than they were before they hired us, and still failed in our system, whether they churned, they said this isn't working, they gave up, or whatever they did. So through that process, I began to realize that this isn't about first principles.
Mm.
This isn't about objectivity. Um, it's not about that when you work with companies that raise a lot of money. And when I started to realize that, it had me feeling less connected to the original vision of the company. Um, and then just as a note, it's like I had a lot of conviction in the ideas, but that's not how self-trust is developed, right? So even when I have a lot of conviction in my ideas and had seen it work in those places, I'm still, in 2019 getting ready to post on LinkedIn and thinking, there's so many people out there that are more experienced than me. Who's going to care what I have to say? Right. I'm still getting nervous before I do a speech. I'm still scared to spend $10,000 on an event because I only have $30,000 in my bank account when I'm getting my company off the ground. The misconception that I figured out on my own is that self trust is rarely built through action.
Mm.
Action is a part of it, but it rarely starts at action. And I think that was a huge breakthrough for me and also through what we're doing at Encoded.